Good morning, everybody here in Bonn in the press conference room. My name is Jeroen Remmers, Director of True Animal Protein Price. And beside me is Lasse Brun. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Lasse Brun. I'm the Director of Food and Climate for the UN Foundation. Good to be with you today.
And we will give a presentation about an initiative started during the last climate conference in Dubai about African ministers who signed a letter, a declaration, urging rich countries to tax meat or greenhouse gas emissions from the food system in general for climate finance and especially for the loss and damage fund. Because, as you know, during this COP conference, loss and damage and finance is one of the biggest issues, how to find the resources for these contributions towards low-income groups. And the rich countries made some commitments already about the adaptation and mitigation support, but they didn't meet the goals. And now we have an additional task for the loss and damage fund. So the need for additional finance is really huge at this moment. And so everybody now is looking for innovative finance mechanisms to bring this money for the loss and damage funds. So maybe you know some news about it because you're working in the UN Foundation about developments, about financing mechanisms. What kind of solutions do you think are now? It's mostly on fossil fuels, I think, that people want finance for.
Yeah, at this point in time, there's not that much progress, in particular in the issues of taxation. As we know, it's a very controversial issue. I mean, you can look at what's been happening in some of the countries where taxation traditionally was introduced on issues like fat and sugar. It was quite quickly taken back. So in terms of financing mechanisms, I don't see anything that is right now providing what we need for a food system transformation.
Yeah, there are some initiatives made by France and Kenya and NGOs supporting them on additional taxes on oil and also to tax rich people more, and there are so many things. But one of the other things is taxation on greenhouse gas emission greenhouse gas emissions in the food system, the agriculture system, because that is also really needed to reduce the emissions, and while those emissions are really growing fast, and by using those tax revenues to also support the finance for the loss and damage fund. But first of all, let me introduce also my organization, the True Animal Protein Price Coalition, founded 5 years ago, and now we have over 70 partner organizations like food companies, but also a lot of NGOs, including farmer organizations, youth organizations, environmental groups. And we are represented in mostly in the EU, but also in Africa and USA. So this press conference is given also on behalf of one of our partners in Africa, the African Climate Action Initiative, ACAI. They wanted to be here, but due to finance problems, they couldn't make it, and there's no online option during this press conference. So I also will represent them. So the contents of this press conference quickly will be the lack of attention for this kind of problems, the meat consumption levels and trends, the effects of it, and what G70 countries are facing now, and the solution for supporting the loss and damage fund by taxing food system emissions. So as you know, meat and dairy are causing most of the climate footprints of food. So it makes sense to start there, like we also started with phasing out coal in the energy transition. I'm not asking to phase out beef, but it makes sense to target beef and pork and cheese as well. They have very high emission rates. So having something there to reduce those emissions in rich countries makes sense. because 33% of global greenhouse gas emissions is from the food system, and this is increasing. And in the EU, meat and dairy consumption cause 80% of all food-related emissions. Globally, this is less, it's nearly 60%. And from all global greenhouse gas emissions, according to a study from Illinois University, 20% is from meat and dairy and eggs alone. And this is similar to all greenhouse gas emissions from Russia and America combined. So it's a lot. And there is a lack of attention, but to be honest, since the last COP conference, this is changing. There's more and more attention for this problem. So we see the nationally determined contributions. There's not much proof that some countries are working on it. Some do, and I hope more and more. But the last COP28 declaration on food and agriculture was signed by 159 countries, and there were made some statements about targeting this problem. So this is positive. And in the last IPCC report, there was also one sentence on greenhouse gas emission taxes on food, especially in rich countries. And that this is really important to do. Also in the last COP27, the Egyptian presidency also referred to the need of especially the reduction of meat consumption in rich countries, because, yeah, let's face it, this is a big problem and it's growing. So this, I was happy that this was also recognized in the last FAO report presented in the last COP, the roadmap report towards climate neutral agriculture and food systems. And there was also one line in it, also on their website, also asking for taxes on food products with relative high greenhouse gas emissions and subsidies for the food products which are better for the climate and better for public health. I think this is really needed. Some trends. So the meat consumption, for instance, has doubled since 1990. And this is expected to continue. A growth of nearly 40% in the number of livestock is expected because of people eat more and more dairy in the world, especially in the middle and low-income countries. The global consumption of meat is 40 kilograms per capita. In the OECD countries and China, it's like 70 kilograms, so much more. And OECD countries and China together consumes over 60% of all meat consumption in the world. But they have only 35% of the population. So there's not a fair distribution of this, similar to what we do with fossil fuels. It's consumed mostly in the rich countries and China. So they have a special responsibility. This is another slide which also points to the biodiversity link of related to meat and dairy. Annually, 13 billion hectares of deforestation is caused also by the growth of meat and dairy consumption in the world because of the need of animal feed. And you need a lot of space to that. So reducing meat and dairy consumption in the world will also benefit nature, biodiversity. It will also benefit food prices, because when there's shortages of land, then prices of food products go. So food security is also really linked to the overconsumption of meat, and to tackle that problem. And for health reasons, it's also very beneficial to reduce meat overconsumption in countries where this is the case. And this, of course, is in OECD countries like USA, but also Australia and China, but also countries like Brazil and Argentina, they overconsume meat, and many other countries. And this is targeting also the healthcare cost problems. Those costs are exploding. The World Bank warned all countries in the world of the obesity problem, which is also partly caused by overconsumption of meat and dairy. And they advised all countries, not only the rich countries, to start taxing unhealthy food products like processed foods, like processed meat. It's in their report. It's not NGOs who's calling this, but the World Bank, because of proper financial management in countries' budgets. So there are many reasons to be active on this field. And well, the discrepancy is clear that especially low-income countries are harmed by meat overconsumption in the rich countries in China. So especially small island developing states, but also African countries, they face the floods, the rising of the sea level, loss of harvest, hunger, deforestation. So there are many problems on the plate of those countries, but they didn't cause the problem. Here you can see the problems facing right now in all coastal zones and island states. You've seen all the pictures of floods. I think this was Pakistan, but it was in Nigeria. It is now here in Germany. It's everywhere. And you know the deforestation in South America and other countries is also growing. So there's a solution, and I'm happy that a letter was signed during the last COP conference by 3 African ministers from Nigeria, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic in Congo. And they represent 30% of the African people. And they signed a letter urging those OECD countries and China to start with taxing greenhouse gas emissions from the food system. Could be meat, could be food in general, it could be agriculture, but there are so many options to tax those products. And use at least 20% of those tax revenues for the funding of the loss and damage fund. So they don't ask too much. So there's this resolution. They're calling those countries also for a closing statement in the COP29 conference or COP 2030 maybe, to transitioning away from animal protein overconsumption according to the national or global dietary guidelines by implementing greenhouse gas emission pricing mechanisms in agri-food systems. And it's urging the EU Commission, OECD countries and China to lead the way towards harmonized greenhouse gas emission pricing systems in agriculture, food systems, and using at least 20% of this revenue for the loss and damage fund. So this is, I think, the main message we have here also at this conference in Bonn and preparing for COP30, that this is important. And as you can see, these are the names of the ministers who support it. And only a very small tax of only 10 euro cents or only $10 cents per 100 gram of meat could lead to a revenue of over 150 billion euros for instance, for the loss and damage fund. So we are not talking about huge taxes, it's just a fraction, and most people can afford it to pay just a little bit more because, let's be honest, in shops meat is really cheap. And we can see in the world there are more and more countries who have carbon pricing instruments, but for energy systems. So there are many countries and blocks who have emission trading schemes with also pricing of greenhouse gas emissions. There are CO2 taxes. There are many systems in place, but I hope that when we are here in 10 years' time, that we have the same map, but also for agriculture food system pricing mechanisms and ETS systems or meat taxes. For instance, this year, Denmark will be the first country who decide on a greenhouse gas emission tax for their livestock sector, because they found out that over 50% of their greenhouse gas emissions is from this one sector, producing meat and dairy. And so they will tax those greenhouse gas emissions. So I think this will be the first example, and then more and more countries will follow. I know Germany is wanting to have the VAT rate increase on meat, dairy, and eggs, also for supporting the farmers with financial income to make a shift towards sustainable and animal welfare systems, etc. So, oh wait, this is the wrong. Yeah, and this month there will be also, for instance, a new conference in Brussels about a new proposal on agriculture ETS systems, emission trading schemes. It's the only sector not yet part of any pricing system in the EU. All other sectors in 2027 will be part of pricing. So like the polluter pays principle is agreed 50 years ago already in all countries, but also in the EU. And it's not implemented on this sector. It's crazy. It's implemented in the energy sector. We pay 100% taxes on our energy and our fuels, but we have no taxes on these products, but they also cause a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm happy that the EU Commission is really serious about it, and it's planning to have a proposal for an EU agriculture emission system proposal in 2026. So conclusion is that meat overconsumption is a big contributor to climate change. Also, it's the same for dairy, of course. It has disproportionate causes and effects in non-OECD countries. There's a COP declaration already who addressed these issues. 159 countries signed it, so now the next steps have to be made to implement those promises. So there's greenhouse gas emission pricing options in the agriculture food sector. It can be used for financing the loss of damage fund. This is a just transition. And now it's up to the non-OECD countries and the small island states, development states, to sign this resolution. It can be done. We have our website, tappcoalition.eu news. There you can see how you can sign. It's easy. And we hope more and more countries will follow the leaders in Africa. So thank you. This is my presentation, but now we can have a reaction from the side of the UN Foundation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeroen. I don't have a presentation. I will just be bothering you with my talk for a bit. So all the facts have been produced here by Jeroen, and some of the solutions and a little bit of a background history. And in the previous panel, there was one of the speakers who said his first COP was 2009, COP15. That happened to be my first COP as well. And at the time, I was there talking about the connection between meat consumption and climate change. And things have improved a little bit since then, but actually not that much, and that's 15 years ago. So we need to get this right. Also because there's overwhelming scientific consensus that unless we address the livestock issue, we simply cannot meet the Paris Agreement. It's not going to be possible, even with the biggest measures within energy climate change mitigation. So why are we doing this? Well, it's one thing is the emissions part, but also the food system is very strongly linked to the financial system, which is inherently inequitable. So it's important to point out we're not talking here about like problems with smallholder farmers in least developed countries or pastoralists. This is about the massive industrialized meat production in the OECD countries and in some low and middle income countries that where it's growing as well. The problem here is that it's essentially about inequity. There's a problem with the fact that there's vast overconsumption of food in some countries and nutrition deficiency in other countries. Unfortunately, the narrative that has been dominant for such a long time has been around the fact if you talk about meat reduction, you are inherently anti-development, which is really not the case. We're talking about meat reduction in the rich states, and as Jeroen pointed out, that can help fund crucial funds like the Loss and Damage Fund. So some of the things we need to be looking into, as it was mentioned here, is also around the just transition and looking into how we can actually make that transition happen. And that has not been addressed so much within the food sector and definitely not within the livestock sector. And part of that is because of the scope. When we talk about a just transition within energy production, we have any given time, we have like 60 to 80 million people who are working within the energy sector. We have 1.3 billion people working within food production. So it's a massive undertaking. But it's really necessary to get started on that. And there are some small steps towards that, but we are really lacking the speed we need. And as Jeroen was alluded to, we really need to apply the common but differentiated responsibility lens to this as well. It is about everybody needs to carry their weight, but those countries who are like polluter pays principle is where we need to be started. And also, when you might think, well, under technical solutions, you might have heard of a lot of efforts being put into addressing the way the meat is produced, so like using feed additives and genetic manipulation of the animals or biogas digesters. And even though in even the best case scenarios on that will not cut it in by any chance. And unfortunately, it also distracts us from the actual real measures we need to take. It's not unlike the whole issue around carbon capture and storage or even solar radiation management. How many people here remember all the discussions about solar radiation management, throwing chemicals into the air to stop the sun from coming through? I mean, these kind of things might have some merit further down in the future, but right now they're not going to solve things. And here's the thing. Even if you were to create a system where there was zero emissions from the livestock sector, even if you managed to do that, it is still inherently inequitable that some countries are over-consuming meat while others are suffering from nutrition deficiency, hunger, stunting of children, and so forth. So it's crucial that we have to move towards a place where there's the polluter pays and where the rich countries are really carrying the weight and taking the onus of the responsibility for making that food transition.
Okay, thank you, Lasse. And I didn't tell that you are also a farmer yourself, so you know where you're speaking about. So I want to open the floor for questions, if you have some. Yes? Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name is Alok Bihari. I'm from Mauritius and also a student here at the United Nations University. Mm-hmm. My question is about how can, so this year we've implemented new climate-related financial disclosure reporting requirements in Europe. Do you think this is an effective tool to hold the industrialized meat and dairy producing industry to, first of all, they'll have to report their scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. Do you think is an effective way of getting them to take ownership and somehow, move towards a polluter pays configuration? And my second question is, so forgive me, do you think there is enough of a pressure on the meat and dairy lobby that they will be able to sort of overcome the years of lobbying against paying higher prices for these things? Like, the meat lobby is very powerful.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So the first one on reporting, yes, this is an important big step that there's transparency on how much greenhouse gas emissions are caused by the food system and by those companies who produce it. So we now already see in the Netherlands, for instance, that our largest supermarkets, they also have this committed to report on greenhouse gas emissions. It's obligated anyway, and they discover, over 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions from the food system are from meat and dairy. So let's sell less of that. So sometimes they increase prices for meat. One supermarket in the Netherlands, they don't give price premiums anymore for those products. And all supermarkets are reducing the prices for alternatives for meat and dairy to make it a level playing field that in terms of price it's comparable to the alternatives of meat and dairy. So yes, it's already working. And on pressure on the meat lobby, yes, it's important to have more organizations, for instance, supporting us and joining us as a partner to have some counter power towards them, because they are really strong, they have a lot of money. And I also heard from persons within FAO that they really lobby very hard to get this out of their reports, etc. Yeah, thanks. Maybe another question?
I can also just make just a brief comment on the question, just to say that with all the focus on finance this year, particularly through the NCQG and the G20, that kind of sets the precedent for the NDC. So you're absolutely right. Unless we get the finance right, it's going to be hard to develop NDCs. And unfortunately, NDCs in most countries are still lacking any input on agriculture, let alone on livestock issues. So that's a place to start. Another interesting venue to look into for this particular issue is scope 3 emissions as well, for companies and for countries for that matter, and how that can be taken back to the livestock production, and often emissions that are kept in the back and not being brought to the forefront. So,
Any other question? Yes.
Yes, I'm Jan Wolf from Buddhist Tsuchi Foundation. I've been following the negotiations on the Sharm el-Sheikh Joint Work Program on Agriculture at this SB, and I was just wondering if you could give me your view on the progress of these negotiations. Thank you.
Maybe you are better.
I can just say briefly, there's not a lot of progress, and there's a problem there which actually relates to what I was talking about before, because the main issue there is a kind of a standoff between the EU and the G77, and that's around food versus agriculture, or food production, consumption. And the G77 is rightfully calling out that we cannot talk about food production, food, we need to talk about agriculture, because we don't want to have consumption levels imposed on us in countries that are suffering from an inequitable food system and where there's nutrition deficiency. So again, it comes back to the OECD countries need to get it right and need to carry their responsibility. That can open up for those conversations. And until we solve the inequity issue, it's going to be hard to have any kind of progress.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is it. Thank you very much for being here and spread the word and hopefully see you later again, and good luck.